revert to the heritage bill, and Deputy, were you in possession? Deputy Smith is next. Okay. You have 2 minutes.
Minister, you said just before we moved from this issue, in relation to the decline of the bird population by 28%, as reported by Birdwatch Ireland, that the European Union places an emphasis on the protection of Ireland's birds. But then you went on to say that the last report given to the EU was in 2013. Now, the report by Birdwatch Ireland is very recent, where they indicate the decline by 28%. So 5 years ago was when we issued the last report, and so obviously it doesn't tally with the evidence coming from Birdwatch Ireland. I want to just refer back to the issue of the bees, because you didn't actually deal with that. And in today's Irish Times, there's a very interesting report by Fitzpatrick and Murray, who've published their findings. And in 2006, they indicated, having done a very careful study of the bee population, which is a difficult thing to do, that half of all the species in Ireland were in decline. And today they sum it up in one sentence: a third of all bee species in Ireland will be extinct by 2013. Some bees are declining so rapidly that we're facing a silent spring of loss, is what they are saying. Now, these are our great unpaid pollinators, and if they go missing, then what? Now, you might say that that's, and you did say that that is largely due to pesticides, and indeed pesticides play a role, but this study also shows that the cutting and the abandonment of hedgerows and the flowers that grow in it also play a major role. So I just want to reiterate those arguments, and to respond to the deputies who spoke here in relation to farmers and how we regard farmers. I think they have an attitude that somehow we're just city slickers that dismiss the concerns of farmers. Not at all. And the reason I mentioned the Burren and the exercise that was taken down there was because they were forced to listen to the farmers and to do the sort of things that the farmers required, and it is working. And therefore, I think that that is what we need to revert to, is to look at a different attitude to nature and to the environment, and to approach the farming community with a clear agenda to enlist them as guardians and protectors of our wildlife, and to ensure that they are adequately incentivised and rewarded for guarding and protecting our wildlife. This bill will do quite the opposite. So I think, Minister, we really need to consider what is at risk here.
Deputy Richard White-Barrett has 2 minutes.
Yeah. What research has been done to ensure that burning in the uplands in March will not damage bird habitats as a background to introducing this measure in this bill? And the answer is none. Right? Under the Birds Directives, you are required to safeguard the habitats of these birds, but you're introducing a measure which potentially endangers them without doing the necessary background research, when the precautionary principle should apply before you take a measure like this. So you haven't done the research, and you're endangering bird life as a consequence. I also want to say, in response to Deputy Fitzmaurice, I accept the point that people who live and work on the land know a lot more than those of us who don't about these things, but he should also accept that there's a biodiversity problem, and that represents a very significant danger to everybody, including farmers, and our ability to continue to produce crops, and indeed just to hold the entire environment on which farmers, most of all, but all of us, depend. And that there is a tension, let's put it this way, there is a tension between certain types of land use by certain forms of agriculture and the concerns to maintain biodiversity, to enhance afforestation, hedgerows, and so on. Now, we need to overcome that tension, and we need to work with farmers to do so, and we need to give them supports, incentives, and so on to be guardians of biodiversity. But it isn't helpful, I think, just to sort of attack the city slickers as being people who don't give a damn about the livelihoods or concerns of farmers. So I don't think we should get into that game. Rather, we should recognise there's a genuine problem with the degradation of biodiversity and bird life and bees and so on, and that we all have an interest in protecting them, and this bill will not do that, but actually degrade biodiversity.
Now, Deputy O'Keefe, you have been in, but you'll be in for 2 minutes. Yeah. You want in now?
Well, whatever.
Well, there's a few who have 7 minutes. Have you been in at all?
I was in 2 minutes early.
Right. Deputy...
No, if you
can wait, Deputy Michael Healy-Rae hasn't been in, so he has 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I do whatever I'm told.
Well, normally you do, yes. Deputy Michael Healy-Rae.
No, you're fine. No, thank you, Les Caller. I'm very grateful of being given the opportunity to speak to this very important debate. I'd like to put on the record a statement that I've made before. When we talk about the protection of wildlife, when we talk about the protection of the future of our family farms, the people who are best able to protect our countryside, who know what's right for land, who know what's right for wildlife, is the people who own that land. Because I know of no farmer that would want to do anything to denigrate his farm or her farm, or the wildlife that lives on it. But I would like to put to bed, finally, a couple of bits of nonsense, Minister, that you and others have to listen to. When we talk about birds and bird habitats, for instance, one of the main reasons that we are given why our hedges can't be cut on the side of our public roads is that we cannot do it during the season in which it is deemed that birds would be foolish enough to put their nests on the side of busy roads. Now, I've been observing wildlife as much as anybody throughout my life, and I have never yet seen a bird being so stupid or foolish that they would want to put their nest on the side of a busy public road. There are plenty of other places to put a nest. So therefore, if people want to come along and cut hedges, they will not be doing anything on the side of the public road to bother or interfere with our bird life. And I and the other people who are involved in farming and who represent farmers on a daily basis, we have the practical common sense of having two eyes in our own heads and being able to see what's around us. So that is one thing that I'd like being put to bed, that there is no reason to stop people of cutting hedges on the side of public roads in the interest of bird life, because that is not true. It is quite simply not a fact that birds make nests on the side of the public road where lorries are whizzing by and buses brushing off the side of them. Why would they be so stupid to do that? But many politicians then seem to jump up and down saying, oh, for God's sake, you can't cut any hedge because you might interfere with bird life. And that is an absolute nonsense. It's very, very important that the role of the farming community, when legislators come into this House, one of the first things that they should do is seriously listen to the farming community, to the people who own the land, to the people who represent the farming community, such as the IFA, the ICMSA, people who are dealing on a daily basis with farmers and the groups representing them. I was very grateful to you, Minister, and I'm actually ask you these days, and I'll be looking for a written reply. You were kind enough to meet a group of farmers from Monvrillock and other bogs where they were debarred from cutting turf. Again, on a very false premise, they were stopped. And we're looking to get those people back into action again and get them doing what they were good at, cutting turf, saving turf. and putting fires for themselves, I think that their fathers and their grandfathers and their grandmothers did before them. And we want to see them and the future generations being able to cut turf again like they did in the past. And I'd be looking for an update on that from you, Minister, in the next 10 days, because the people are looking for an update, and it's good for you to know about that. There are traditions in country life that are very important, and whether it comes to cutting turf, whether it comes to, like this year when people were fortunate enough to be able to save hay, and despite the fact that we looked for a derogation from the Minister with regard to the 1st of July, and we didn't get what we looked for, but at the same time we tried our best to make common sense prevail. But you know, if the Minister left us down on the first Sunday, maybe that the weather won't now anyway, and people will be able to get hay from those grounds that they were debarred from cutting hay on the 1st of July. I've always said that calendar farming is a nonsense, because you quite simply can't have a situation where you can predict what the weather is going to be like and therefore tell people that they're going to farm in accordance with a calendar. You can't do that. You could often have a better January or February when it comes to spreading slurry and other business like that. You could have a better January and February than you could have July or August. So these are things that have to be taken into account. And again, I wasn't inside in the chamber, but I heard Deputy Fitzmaurice's contribution, and I thought it was worthwhile and sound, and nothing more than what I would have expected from him. But I would urge other people, when they're coming up with whether it's to do with burning, it's nice for people to know what they're talking about, and it's nice for people to understand how important burning is, and how important it is the fact that it have common sense and know again that there are only certain times of the year when you can burn, quite simply because the place won't bloody well burn for you. And the killing thing about it is tis when you wouldn't want it to burn, it'll burn, and when you would want it to burn, you can't get it to burn at all. So that's the climate that we're living in. But for people to think that you can come along and legislate and ignore the common sense things such as the weather, such as the climate that we were living in, and there has to be allowances made for that. And that's why I'd like to see common sense prevailing, because we went from one extreme to the other, where hills were overgrown, then completely bare, and then gone overgrown again. And why? Because of people over in Europe, because of people in different forums making laws when they didn't know the first thing about what they were talking about. And if any one of them had any bit of practical common sense, they wouldn't be engaging in half the nonsense and rubbish that they're talking about. There's more reports compiled last count caller, and there's more forums brought together, and you know, it is very little good would see coming out of an awful lot of them. All it takes is a bit of practical common sense to know what we need in rural Ireland to survive and to keep places in order, to keep places from being overgrown, and to make sure that vegetation that should be burnt to allow new regeneration is burnt at a time when it can be burnt, and not some person with a suit telling people when they should try to burn it and when they shouldn't try to burn it. Thank you.
I'll call now on Deputy Joan Burton, who has 7 minutes.
Thank you. I want to speak in favour of the amendment. I want to speak really tonight to Fine Gael. I do understand that Fine Gael is in many ways a farmers' party, particularly of big farmers and large farmers. And in my understanding of farmers, both smaller and bigger farmers, they're extremely interested and dedicated to the preservation of the wildlife heritage of Ireland. But the Strategic Communications Unit, in all the material and the various videos it's produced so far for the government, there's lots of overshots of the island of Ireland. And prominent in those shots, those kind of sweeping lyrical shots that come in from the cliffs of Moher and go over eventually over counties like Meath and so on. What you can see in Ireland is a mixture of fields and hedges and hedgerows. And essentially, our hedgerows are there in place of a lot of the forests and the deciduous forests that, for various historical reasons, we don't have in this country. So to suggest that the hedgerows should be endangered and put in peril, really, I simply don't understand where Fine Gael is coming from on this. I think lots of young people in particular respect our environmental heritage. The people who came and lobbied the Dail and the Shannon on a number of occasions were interested in issues like pollination and pollinators, insects and birds. And I don't think anybody has made an argument that what's proposed in this bill won't imperil all of that enormous wildlife heritage that we as a people have inherited and that we should continue to protect. We should do it for ourselves and for what we have inherited, but if we want to think about money, we should do it in terms of the kind of marketing, the marketing sell that we have put to people both in Ireland and coming from abroad to come and holiday in Ireland. We should do it because of the way we branded and marketed food coming through on board Bia and our other products from cattle to sheep and so on. That Ireland is a country, small island, but with a very, very strong appreciation of its wildlife heritage and of its heritage in terms of issues like hedgerows. So what I just want to say to the Minister, I don't really understand to whose advantage this is, other than in some narrow way of tidying up our countryside. Now, the issues around potential traffic accidents and so on, and work that needs to be done to provide for road safety, I think they've been adequately dealt with and can be addressed via the local county councils. But I think what the Minister is actually proposing in the bill, and I'm sure she's somebody who's as committed to heritage and to our hedgerow and wildlife heritage as the rest of us are. I would really ask her to think again, because, you know, once the hedges over a period of time become diminished and reduced, as the people here who are farmers know quite well, what's diminished and reduced is extremely difficult to restore. And if you allow, and I think we're all familiar with it, the very big machines to come in and scalp the hedges so that there's little or nothing left. And so the various species of birds, the various species of fauna, of trees, of plants and so on that inhabit the hedges, over a period of time, they're so constantly hacked back that the whole is diminished. Minister, I think that's a mistake. And for Irish people and for the visitors who come to Ireland, who enjoy that green aspect of Ireland, much of which is a function of this linear system of hedgerows, which comprises tens of thousands of miles of natural wildlife special ways. At the moment, all around the country, we're creating ways in which people can walk and cycle, whether it's using disused old roads or railway lines, and we're all finding the pleasure in that. And yes, farmers have a living to make, and we all know they have it tough. but I genuinely feel, notwithstanding that a lot of people making the argument in favour of these changes would claim that they're acting in the best interests of farmers, in the end, people who farm have to be close to the land, close to their animals, and they have to know that they farm it in order to pass it on to the next generation. So, Minister, I'd really appeal to you and the Fine Gael party. This is a majority Fine Gael government. You don't have to listen to other voices. Most of the independents in your government come from the Fine Gael family, so you're talking to yourselves. I think that's all the more reason why you should ponder whether or not you do this as easily as you seem to be doing it. And I really recommend that you think again on this.
Deputy O'Keefe was 2 minutes.
The first thing I'd like to say that in general, in lots of parts of the country, the hedges are a lot higher, a lot bigger than they were 40 or 50 years ago, or even more, especially 100 years ago, where every winter they came and they cut them back really, really low. And that testimony is available that that's the way it was, because land was scarce and land was precious. And they had a way of folding the hedges in. So the idea that, and all you have to do is look out from where my house is and look across the countryside, because I'm on a slight height, and you'll see a lot more growth out there than there was when I arrived in the place. But, Minister, there's been talk about a fire or fires in the Dublin Mountains in the last week. And it always seems to me that people presume that these fires are started by farmers who purposely disregard the law. Minister, I understand these fires occurred on land in the ownership of your department. Have you any preliminary indications as to who started the fires or how they started, and whether farmers did start the fires or not?
Wait, you indicated?
No, I spoke.
Oh, you've spoken twice. Okay. Very honourable. I've called Deputy Healy Ray, who indicated he has 7 minutes. His first contribution.
Thank you very much, Les Concola. I have to say that I welcome this bill, the extension of the hedge cutting time to include the month of August and the burning time to include the month of March. And in relation to the burning, we have to, I've always said that it's the 15th of April in the north of Ireland, and there's only a ditch, a bones ditch between us, between the north and the south. And it didn't make much sense that we'd have to abide by the end of February, and maybe February, many Februaries have been wet and you couldn't burn. And it goes, why do we have to burn? Because land becomes overgrown, and you see, and when it's overgrown, it's useless, and sheep or cattle can't graze it. And there's great merit in extending the burning for the month of February or the month of March, because you may get a chance that the weather will dry up around the middle of February, and that you could burn the bit that you want to do. But we need to go back to what the farmers used to do in years gone by, which was controlled burning. And that time, Coillte used to help the farmers. You'd notify Coillte that you wanted to burn, and they'd assist you to ensure that it wouldn't go into forestries or spread to other lands, and they had a way in doing it. But it can still be done methodically and carefully by opening a fire belt so that it doesn't travel, and all farmers should be advised to where their land is prone to burning, or that it may go from their land to someone else to open a fire belt. It doesn't cost that much, and it could improve matters greatly if controlled burning was carried out, and that's what we should be aiming to do. Now, roadside hedges are to be allowed to be cut in the month of August under this bill, and I welcome that very much. Even though that I've always said that roadside hedges should be cut all the year round. For the safety of road users, every aspect of road users, whether it is people walking, they're in danger. We're all taught that we must walk for health-wise, and so many roads are so dangerous, so your eyes would be peeked out if we're trying to stay in close in a narrow road so that you don't get knocked down. And your eyes could be picked out if we're cycling, you could be knocked off the bicycle with briars or whatever. So it's imperative that roadside hedges are kept cut and that roads are safe for people to walk and to cycle and to drive on. And so many people complain to me, it's a regular thing, asking for hedges to be cut when they're trying to pass a car on a narrow road. A new car costs, whoever buys it, it costs money, and if it gets all scratched and tore, you're damaging property, and that shouldn't be the case. And I suppose school buses is another regular request to get hedges cut or branches cut to allow school buses go up and down to pick up children in country roads. It's one of the main issues and the main calls that local representatives get. I'm sure I get them anyway every day, and it's important for the safety of our children that a branch doesn't, or a briar or something doesn't break a windscreen and a side window, and children get damaged or get injured on the bus. You have farmers regularly complaining they can't get up and down, they can't get goods up or down, or the milk lorry or whatever, and mirrors being broke, and they're €1,000 a piece, and even in the Ringy-Kerris parts of it, it's still not clear or safe for tour buses. There's only the width of one bus. They can't pass a car where the hedges are out and the briars are out in certain places. It's ridiculous to think that, you know, it's been said that we're hurting the birds nesting, and as I've said, I even said it in Kerry County Council, what bird would be so foolish to make a nest over the road or on the side of the road? And when the wind of a lorry would come along and blow what feathers would be, blow their feathers off them, they'd be left standing naked in the middle of the road. So it doesn't make any sense, and I've no problem or no request no request to cut the hedges inland. It's the road we're talking about, the roadside hedges, and they should be cut and kept cut for the safety of everyone, of all road users. I mean, the next thing, you could have someone saying that part of the road should be given away to wildlife, as well as giving away the side of the road. The side of the road is part of the road network, and it should be treated as such. And you know, local authorities in the past have refused to cut the roadside hedges because of national a law that was passed inside here around 1993. And they said it is none of their business to cut the roadside hedges, Minister. However, if you were to go do something outside your ditch, between the ditch and the road, the local authority wouldn't be long tell you to get out of it. So it is part of the road network, whether it is local roads or national roads, and it should be treated as such, because there's another bill, I believe, coming through the door where they're saying that you must keep out 1.5 metres from a cyclist if we're passing them. But if the cyclist is keeping out from the briars, he's shoved out further onto the road. That will mean that if you're passing that person, you may not be able to pass them at all on a narrow road, because if there's a car coming against you and maybe a bicycle on the other side, you'll be going straight for the other car. So, Minister, I am supporting you in this bill to ensure that the roadside hedges are cut in the month of August as well, and that the burning, that farmers will be allowed to burn in the month of March. Thank you very much,
Fitzmaurice, who's 2 minutes.
I think just for the record, a few things needs in relation to Deputy Boyd Barrett. I just want to address a few things he brought up. It isn't that there's a city against a country scenario, but you're coming from a backdrop last year when farmers, especially in Galway and Mayo, that had absolutely nothing got to do with fires, and the records are there to prove that they hadn't. In actual fact, if you look at the records, there was nothing got to do with the farmers of some people that were questioned about it. And the Irish Wildlife Trust went and made an informal report to Europe, which left them farmers one of the worst winters without money. Now, you can understand then that at the same time then people expect to walk up those mountains, which is great, and tourists, and be welcome. But there is an underlying current there of farmers that has been left basically penniless last winter because of that report put in. And I think that that needs to be, you have to work with people, not be reporting them. And also in the Gloss scenario, we have to look at Gloss. At the moment, you talk about the bees. Farmers that are in Gloss are compulsified to put out sand. And the biggest, and I do contracting. I bail for people, and they have their sand out in the field, which has actually improved the amount of bees. And the problem is the badgers are coming out, and they are actually eating the honey and killing some of the bees. I've seen it with farmers. They'll tell you what's going on, but they are doing that. They are putting up bat boxes. They are traditional hay meadow. They are cutting fields from the middle out to save wildlife. And I think that all that is basically helping the biodiversity. And I think that it's very important that we acknowledge the amount of work that's being done by the farmers that way in all places. In the line of burning, we're not asking to burn this time of year. Let everyone be clear. Everyone's on about the fires on at the moment. But let's not be talking about farmers doing it. It's some carelessness, and no one condones fires or anyone doing anything like that at the moment. What we are talking about in Connemara or in mountain areas in February, you wouldn't start a fire if it wouldn't go. And you might have some hope. And it's controlled burning to make sure. And it's under certain, you can't just do it willy-nilly. And as I say, the vegetation that grows back is very important. And I think that all these things need to be understood in what we are trying to achieve.
Catherine Mark.
Minister, just in reply to some of the comments you made, I do appreciate that there have been prosecutions taken under Section 40 of the Wildlife Act which relate to the cutting of hedges during the closed periods. But there aren't very many, but they do happen. But it is Section 22 of the Wildlife Act which protects birds, their nests and eggs from mutilation and injury. And this is the section that you reminded deputies of at committee stage and of its importance for the protection of our birds. But since 2015 there have been 0 prosecutions carried out. So the protection and the resources simply aren't there to protect our birds. I was very interested to hear, Minister, because I know you have a very hectic schedule, that you had time to meet a turf cutting delegation, courtesy of Deputy Michael Healy-Rae, because it is my understanding that Birdwatch Ireland requested a meeting with you to discuss the impact of this devastating bill, and no such meeting was facilitated, and I think that's highly regrettable. And I'm wondering, did you have time to meet, since you've time to meet the tough cutters, did you have time to meet the members of the Environmental Pillar and the Wildlife Trust? But I know that Birdwatch Ireland definitely asked you for a meeting, and no such meeting was facilitated. And it's a shameful lack of consultation with a stakeholder like that. Also, just to say, Minister, that at previous stages of the bill, you justified this legislation's expansion of burning into March on Northern Ireland's burning period, which extends to the 14th of April. However, what you did not mention is the fact that this situation is currently an unmitigated disaster in Northern Ireland. In 2017, there were 2,231 wildfires all over Northern Ireland that the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service had to attend, and 511 of those occurred after the 1st of May. So despite having a longer burning season, which you kept making the comparison, this will be good and it will stop things. But despite having that longer burning season, out-of-control fires have continued to wreak havoc in Northern Ireland, so changing the dates for burning will not stop out-of-control fires, as controlled burning as a management tool is virtually non-existent in Ireland. So this bill, as it is currently drafted, will be disastrous for our wildlife and our natural heritage.
And Dr. Catherine Murphy.
Just to add my voice to some of the points that have been raised already in relation to Section 7 and 8 of this bill, I think the question we've got to ask ourselves is, does this add protection to wildlife? And in actual fact, I mean, I don't think you could make an argument that it does. It does the reverse. We know that 1/3 of the 98 bee species in Ireland are threatened with extinction. We also know how important the bee population is in terms of pollination of crops and of plants. And essentially, I mean, you only have to see, I have a very small garden at home, but I deliberately grew things that attracted bees, and you can see that you can actually have a positive impact in very small spaces in reversing the kind of damage that happens as a consequence of things like pollutants and pesticides and agrochemicals and things like that. I think most farmers appreciate the importance of wildlife on the health of land and agriculture. But the thing about it is that agriculture is having an impact on a very direct impact on the number of it's having a direct impact on the threatening of the bee population. I just was intrigued, and I just finish off by saying this. I was just intrigued that I thought I was seeing things when I saw birds in nests beside trees quite close to where I live that are right beside a road. And I'm thinking there must be terrible stupid birds in Kildare. They don't seem to be that stupid in Kerry. They can avoid making their nests on the side of the road. I never heard anything so ridiculous, to be perfectly honest with you. So let's not be lecturing people about knowledge of the countryside. Like, you only have to drive along a road and you'll see that birds actually don't pick and choose where the road system goes, and they'll nest wherever they can find an appropriate place to nest. And can we talk a little bit of sense?
Now, no one else offering, or I think everybody had an opportunity. So now it's the Minister, and Minister, you.
Thank you,
you have only 2 minutes.
I know, I've only 2 minutes. Unfortunately, the only way I'm going to be able to be fair is to start from the beginning for people who spoke first, and if I don't get to you, my apologies. Deputy Smith, I spoke about the bees already earlier on, so I'm not going to talk about that again. What you did mention, though, is the curlews also, and managed burning is actually very good for the curlew and the red grouse. In fact, the biggest enemy of the curlew is unmanaged or degradation of existing habitat and predation. And this is actually the scientific view of the leading expert on our birds in the National Parks and Wildlife Service, Dr. Barry O'Donoghue. And I spoke about that at the committee, and my department is actually spending $400,000 over the next 3 years on a curlew management programme. Sean Sherlock, Deputy Sherlock mentioned, he's not here, he mentioned, perhaps I won't talk about that because he's not here, but he did mention as well about a public consultation process. As you did, Deputy Boyd Barrett, there was an extensive public consultation. There were 188 submissions, and there was analysis by my experts from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, led, as I said, by the Chief Scientist, Dr. O'Keefe. And it's a pilot that will be very closely monitored. In my view, what Birdwatch are actually saying, it's a flagrant distortion of the facts. in my view, what they're characterising is not evidence-based, and in my opinion, and the view of the department and our scientific research, does not bear gravitas at all to what they are saying. The Deputy Boyd Barrett actually didn't make a submission, even though he's talking about the public consultation. There were a range of stakeholder groups, including Birdwatch Ireland, who contributed on TASCA, the IFA, the ICMSA. I want to thank Deputy Fitzmaurice for your contribution. The dose of reality that you bring in relation to the obligations on the landowners since 1993 is refreshing and bracing. I also want to talk to Deputy O'Keefe. You mentioned about the regulations. They will permit controlled burning only, and only in years when the winter rainfall is higher than average. And advice will be provided on rotational burning, and also there will be guidelines to state that burning should not be carried out in blanket bog habitat. The guidelines will also emphasise that species and habitat considerations should also be to the fore before embarking on a planned burn, and the objective should always be to return the habitat to its pre-burn condition in a reasonable time frame, and guidance will also be provided on how to carry out controlled burning to benefit certain ground nesting birds such as the hen harrier, the red grouse, the curlew and the golden plover. And again, Deputy O'Keefe, I want to thank you for the second dose of reality as well. And this bill actually gives limited authority to allow burning in parts of Ireland for only some time during March under certain conditions, as I said, on a pilot basis. I also want to talk to Deputy Martin in relation to the people that are fighting the fires. My staff have been doing that, and other public servants. I want to thank them for the bravery. The fires were set out in the Dublin Mountains are actually deliberate arson, and they're being investigated at the moment. The Deputy's use of slash and burn is unfortunate, and it's inaccurate and purely political in my view, and simply quotes the headline. Again, these are pilot initiatives subject to SAIs that will come before the Houses, and there will be guidelines. And also you mentioned in relation to Ticknock. Regrettably, the setting of those fires follows a pattern of fires in uplands close to large urban centres. And if you only look at Manchester this week, and my senior officials today met with Coillte counterpart to plan a programme of action to monitor and police this antisocial activity, including the possible use of drone technology to catch the perpetrators in the act. And Deputy Sherlock, just to reassure him that this evening is actually the 11th time that this bill has been before the Oireachtas. There have been more than 32 hours of debate before tonight, and the public consultation, Deputy Boyd Barrett, lasted 4 months, as I said, at almost 200 submissions. Deputy Toveen, obviously as Minister I'll make regulations when necessary, for example when weather has been adverse and there's no question of a blanket permission to burn in March. Can I beg your indulgence for just a couple more moments? Right, I'll leave it. Okay.
No, I think because of the interest. No, just because of the interest, we'll give you another minute.
Yeah, I'll give you another minute.
Is that agreed?
Just to say to Deputy Ryan, the fires in March will not be carte blanche. And in 2008, the government, of which you were a member, stopped recruiting the National Park and Wildlife Service rangers, and this government is now recruiting rangers. I'm doing these in the order, Alas Count Corlett, that the questions or the comments were made. Deputy Boyd Barrett, the positive effect of managed burning at the correct time of year is important, and the unmanaged burning results in extensive areas of upland burning for long periods, and there's a reversible change to the habitat, and that's important. So also my department's National Park and Wildlife Service is constantly maintaining and counting species, and we spend millions per annum on our science programme, and that's how we know about species in decline. And the reports you quote are National Parks and Wildlife Service reports. The bees, Deputy Healy-Rae, Deputy, make an interesting point. In approximately 455,000 hectares, or 6.4% of the country, is covered by hedgerows, individual trees and woodlands, and the birds are still protected. Deputy Burton, this bill will not result in the removal of a single hedgerow. It will allow the trimming of a single year's growth on the road-facing side of roadside hedges, and I agree that our hedgerows need to be cared for and managed, and this bill seeks to allow for careful management where hedges on roadsides are overgrown. There are some other points there, but Deputy Burton, the Labour Party supported the Heritage Bill when it was published, and you remember the government that approved the bill. We're not scalping hedges, and to suggest that is a mistake. And if you should know that we are prohibiting flails and grubbing, and it's actually an improvement. And we have also prosecutions in relation to under the Wildlife Act. Thank you, Thank
you, Minister. Deputy Paddy Tobin, who proposed the amendment, has 2 minutes.
Minister, the majority of farmers in this country are broke. There's only about a third of farmers that are actually individually economically sustainable with the way the farming industry has gone in this country, and a third of other farmers have to work outside of the farm to actually make ends meet. And they're broke for a number of reasons. The main reason is that they're not getting paid enough for their produce. Meat factories and supermarkets are squeezing them currently. And obviously another reason is that the way the CAP system is built, richer farmers are getting the bulk of that particular money, and farmers are drowning in a sea of paperwork. And climate change is radically affecting the way farmers are able to work. And we see year after year there are fodder crises happening currently where the country is not able to provide enough fodder for the farming industry that's there. So anybody that stands up and tells farmers that this particular bill is a panacea, or that this particular bill is going to solve the problems that they face, is involved in deceit, because this is not going to stack up to a hill of beans with regards to the real issues that are facing farmers. The fact is that there's a false dichotomy here as well. That we've heard over and over again by yourself and some of the opposition TDs that this is about road safety. There's nobody in this Dáil, there's nobody in this country that's not saying cut a verge and a hedge back when they're dangerous. Everybody agrees with that. There's not one person disagrees with that. All we're saying is cut the dangerous ones back and leave the rest of them there. And that's why we've put these amendments into the bill, very simply, to make that arrangement. So anybody that stands up here and talks about children on buses and people in new cars is talking Tommy Rot. The actual fact is, there's any number of amendments. There's any number of amendments here that would solve the issue of dangerous verges and dangerous hedges. And it's really important that people accept that first and foremost. So let's call a spade a spade. When you burn landscape and when you cut back hedges, you destroy habitat. You destroy habitat and sustenance for the biodiversity of this country. And the biodiversity of this country is radically depleting before our eyes. And this particular bill proceeds with that. So I'd really ask the Minister to delete Section 7 of this particular bill, because it's the most odious element of the bill, and to accept very logical, reasonable responses such as 19 there, which asks the Minister to make regulations to establish a new task force to identify efficient agriculture and environmentally sympathetic ways of doing business. Both the environment and agriculture can work in sympathy if it's allowed to do so, but not under this particular bill.
Right, thank you. So, Deputy Tobin, who proposed, where stands Amendment 15? You're pressing. Amendment 15, Ichuratan Awara Badista, and the Gunya Badisniel, Sinan Golan Cash Culture.